I don't know when I started noticing the way her silence filled the room. Maybe it was the night she stood on the terrace, leaning against the railing as if the cool stone was the only thing keeping her steady. The house behind us was quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your ribs. And there she was, my aunt, though the word never fit the woman in front of me. Mid-40s, poised, graceful, with an air of self-possession that made every small gesture feel intentional. She turned her head slightly when she sensed me step out. The faintest smile touched her lips, not quite an invitation, not quite a refusal. The moonlight had a way of softening her, catching in her hair, drawing pale lines across her skin. "You shouldn't be awake at this hour," she said, her voice low, carrying more weight than the words themselves. I shrugged, though my chest felt too tight to be casual. "Neither should you." Her laugh was soft, almost unnoticeable. She didn't answer right away, just looked out over the sleeping neighborhood, the rooftops, the scattered lamps, the faint barking of a dog in the distance. It was in those pauses, I realized, that she gave the most away. The longer she waited, the more she was telling me without words. I stood near her, not too close, but close enough to feel the warmth radiating off her body. It wasn't the summer heat that unsettled me, it was her. She shifted, and her hand brushed mine, light, accidental, but my fingers betrayed me by wanting to linger. I curled them into a fist, hoping she hadn't noticed. Her eyes flickered toward me. She had noticed. The air seemed to thicken. I tried to breathe normally, but every inhale caught the faint trace of her perfume, something subtle, floral, almost faded now, like it had clung to her all evening and refused to leave. "You always look at the sky," I said, my voice sounding rougher than I intended. Her lips curved, though not into a smile. "The sky doesn't ask questions." I didn't answer. My throat tightened. She glanced at me then, properly, her gaze holding mine a moment too long. I wanted to look away, but couldn't. Her eyes weren't gentle, they were searching, as if weighing whether I was still a boy or something else entirely. The silence stretched. Somewhere in it, my pulse became embarrassingly loud. She exhaled, and her breath misted in the cool night air. "The moon makes me say things I shouldn't," she whispered, her voice barely more than a sigh. My mouth opened before I even knew what I wanted to ask, but nothing came out. The words hung between us, trembling like the fragile edge of a glass about to spill. She turned away quickly, as though her own confession startled her. I didn't move. I couldn't. Her hand rested lightly on the railing, her knuckles pale under the moonlight. For a second, I thought about covering it with mine, not in a bold way, but as if to steady her, to keep her from slipping further into whatever secret she had just let slip. But I didn't. I just stood there, with my hand halfway lifted, frozen in the air like an unfinished thought. The door behind us creaked open. We both turned at once. And just like that, the moment shattered, scattering like glass into the night. The creak of the door had been nothing, just the wind catching it, swinging it against the frame. Still, the sound broke whatever fragile thread had been binding us. She moved first, stepping back a little, folding her arms loosely over her chest as though wrapping herself in her own protection. I pretended to look at the stars, but my eyes kept catching on her profile, the strong line of her jaw, the faint shadows beneath her eyes, the way her lips pressed together like they were holding secrets. "Do you ever regret things?" I asked quietly, surprising myself. Her head tilted toward me, but she didn't answer immediately. That was her way, silence first, then words chosen like stones placed carefully in water. "Regret," she said at last, "is a trick of memory. Some days I tell myself I don't believe in it. Other days—" She trailed off, shaking her head as though chasing the thought away. I wanted to ask more, but the weight in her voice stopped me. She wasn't someone you could push. Instead, I leaned against the railing, keeping my arms loose, casual, though every muscle in my body was drawn toward her. "I've never really been in love," I admitted, my throat tightening as I said it. Her eyes flicked toward me then, sharp and searching. "Not once?" I gave a crooked smile. "I'm 23. I've tried." But it never stayed. I think people always sensed I wanted something I couldn't explain. She studied me, her gaze softer now. For a moment, I thought she might laugh or dismiss me as naive. But she didn't. She only nodded, her shoulders lowering slightly, as if something in my confession eased her own guard. I used to think love was supposed to be simple, she said, her voice quieter now. Two people meet, they fit, and that's that. But it isn't like that. It's complicated. Messy. Sometimes it feels like you're holding fire in your hands, knowing you'll get burned, but you can't let go. Her words hung between us, more dangerous than the night air. I realized then how little I actually knew about her past. She never talked about old relationships, about why she lived alone in that big house, why her laughter always carried a shadow. I wondered who had left her with the kind of silence that seeped into her bones. And I hated, just a little, that I wasn't the first to notice it. She turned toward me suddenly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. The movement was simple, ordinary, but her hand lingered near her neck, drawing my eyes helplessly. I looked away too late. She noticed. Careful, she murmured, her lips curving faintly. You're too transparent. Heat crept up the back of my neck. I tried to answer, but the words tangled. Instead, I laughed under my breath, scratching the side of my jaw to cover it. She stepped closer then, so close that the edge of her shawl brushed against my arm. The fabric was light, but it felt heavier than it should have. You're young, she said softly, almost like a warning. You see things as possibilities. I see them as risks. I met her gaze, steady this time. And yet you're still here. On this terrace. With me. Her lips parted slightly, as if to answer, but no words came. She only exhaled, and the faint warmth of her breath brushed my cheek. It sent a shiver through me I tried to hide by shifting my weight. The silence stretched again, deep and charged. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips, in my throat, everywhere. My hand lifted almost without permission, hovering near her shoulder. When I finally let it rest there, lightly, cautiously, she didn't pull away. Her skin was warm beneath the thin fabric of her blouse. She closed her eyes for the briefest second, as though letting herself feel it, before stepping back just enough to reclaim the space between us. But she didn't remove my hand. Not until much later, when the night deepened and the air grew colder, did she finally draw away. She gave me a look unreadable, but not dismissive, before turning back toward the dark horizon. And in that silence, with her warmth still ghosting against my palm, I realized something had shifted. Not spoken, not agreed upon, but undeniable. The next evening, I found her in the kitchen, rinsing a glass under the tap. The radio played low in the background, some old song, soft and unintrusive. She didn't notice me at first. Or maybe she did, and just let me stand there. When she finally glanced up, water dripping from her fingers, she gave me the smallest smile. You're quiet. I leaned against the doorway. Maybe I don't have much to say. Or too much, she countered, drying her hands on a towel. The exchange was simple, harmless on the surface. But beneath it ran an undercurrent I couldn't ignore. She moved past me to put the glass away, her shoulder brushing mine. My pulse jumped at the contact, though I forced myself not to flinch. We ended up in the living room, side by side on the couch, the silence between us broken only by the ticking of the clock on the wall. She sat with her legs crossed, fingers tracing the seam of her skirt. I sat too close, but not close enough to touch. The distance shrank in small ways, her leaning in to show me something on her phone, my knee angling toward hers. Each movement carried weight, as though we were tiptoeing along the edge of something neither of us could name. Do you ever think? I began, then stopped. Her head tilted, her eyes catching mine. Think what? That maybe we shouldn't. A sharp knock at the door cut through the air. We froze. She straightened immediately, tucking her hair behind her ear, smoothing her blouse as though someone had already seen us. My throat went dry. Another knock. A neighbor's voice called lightly, asking if she had the recipe she'd promised. She stood, her movements careful, precise. "Stay here," she whispered, and for a moment her hand brushed my arm, not reassuring, not warning, just there. I sat rigid, listening to the muffled exchange at the door. Laughter, polite words, the sound of paper rustling. Then the door closed again. Silence returned, thicker than before. She didn't look at me right away when she came back. Instead, she lingered near the shelf, fingers trailing along the spines of old books. "That," she said softly, "is exactly why we shouldn't." Her words cut, though her tone was tender. I shifted forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "But you didn't tell her I was here." That made her pause. Slowly she turned. Our eyes locked across the dim room, and something broke in the stillness between us. She crossed the space first this time, sitting back down, closer now, too close. I could see the faint rise and fall of her breath, the way her lips parted slightly as though she wanted to speak but couldn't. My hand hovered, trembling in the air, before finally resting against hers. Her fingers tightened almost instinctively, then loosened, then tightened again. "Don't," she whispered, but the word carried no force. I leaned in before I could stop myself. Her scent filled me, warm and floral, her breath grazing my skin. Our foreheads nearly touched, the space between our mouths thinner than air. The clock ticked louder, the world narrowing until it was just her, just me, just the unbearable closeness. Then she pulled back, not far, only enough to leave the kiss unfinished. Her hand rose, brushing against my jaw, lingering there a heartbeat too long before falling away. "We can't," she said, almost to herself. But neither of us moved apart. We stayed there, drawn together, resisting and failing in the same breath. For 2 days we barely spoke. She busied herself with little things, watering the plants, folding laundry that didn't need folding, keeping conversations clipped. I pretended to study, tapping at my laptop without seeing a word. The silence wasn't ordinary anymore. It was heavy, purposeful. By the third night, I couldn't take it. She was on the terrace again, shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders, staring at the sky as though it held her hostage. "You're avoiding me," I said. Her back stiffened. "Don't be foolish." "I'm not. You won't even look at me." She turned slowly then, moonlight catching the sharp edges of her face. "Because looking at you is dangerous." The words hit harder than I expected. I took a step closer, then another. She didn't move, didn't retreat, just watched me with eyes that gave away too much. "Why dangerous?" My voice came low, rougher than I meant. Her lips parted, but she hesitated. The night air buzzed with everything unsaid. Finally, she whispered, "Because you make me forget who I am supposed to be." The confession hung there, unsteady, and for a moment neither of us breathed. I reached up, without thinking, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. My fingers grazed her temple, softer than I intended. She closed her eyes for half a second, leaning, just slightly, into the touch. "You don't have to pretend with me," I murmured. Her eyes opened, sharp and luminous, searching mine. "And what happens if I stop pretending?" I swallowed hard. My hand lingered near her cheek, close enough to feel her warmth. "Then we stop lying to ourselves." Something broke in her then, a crack in the armor she wore so carefully. She exhaled sharply, almost like a laugh, almost like a sob. "You don't understand. People will talk. They'll call me foolish. Desperate. You'll resent me for it later." "I won't." The words came out before I could second-guess them. Too fast, too certain. Her breath caught, and she pressed her lips together, as if holding them still could contain everything rushing between us. My hand slid down, catching hers. Her fingers trembled, but she didn't pull away. "I think about you," I admitted quietly. "More than I should. More than I can stop." She froze. Her hand tightened in mine, then loosened. She shook her head slightly, as though scolding herself, but the tears in her eyes betrayed her. "Don't say that." "I already did." For a moment, we simply stared at each other, too close, too bare. Her chest rose and fell quickly, and I realized I was leaning in. Not fast, not bold, just slowly, inevitably, as though gravity itself had chosen this moment. Her breath brushed against my lips. My heart hammered so loudly I was certain she could hear it. She tilted her face toward me, barely, almost imperceptibly, but it was enough to send fire racing through my veins. "Say something," I whispered, desperate. She did. A single line, barely audible, but enough to shatter the night. "If you kiss me now, I won't stop you." The world narrowed to her words, her mouth, the trembling space between us. And then, the sound of footsteps in the hall. We jerked apart, both breathless, both shaken, caught on the knife's edge of something we couldn't undo. The footsteps in the hall had passed, but their echo lingered in us. We barely spoke the rest of that night. She disappeared to her room, and I lay awake listening to the walls breathe, knowing she was just a few feet away and yet unreachable. By morning, the house felt different. Charged. Fragile. She avoided me in the kitchen, moving with a careful precision, as though even standing too close would unravel everything. I should have mirrored her restraint. Instead, I found myself following her with my eyes, memorizing every tilt of her head, every absent brush of her hand against the counter. It was that afternoon when the truth cracked open. I was in the living room when I heard her on the phone. She didn't know I was near. I'd been half hidden by the doorway, a book in my lap I hadn't been reading. Her voice was low, urgent. "No, I can't explain. He's here, yes, don't you see? If anyone finds out, they'll think—" She broke off sharply, silence swallowing her words. My chest tightened. She knew. She knew what this was, what we were balancing on. And worse, she had already confided in someone else. The floor creaked under my weight, and she turned. Her eyes widened when she saw me standing there, caught in the spill of sunlight from the window. For a second, neither of us spoke. "You hurt," she said softly. Not a question. I nodded. Her fingers clenched around the phone, then loosened. She set it down on the table slowly, as though each movement needed control. "It wasn't." She stopped, swallowed hard. "It wasn't what you think." "Then tell me," I said, my voice tighter than I meant. Her eyes searched mine, restless, raw. "Someone called last week. They noticed how much time we've been spending together. Asked questions? Too many questions." She drew in a sharp breath. "If people start talking, they'll make it ugly." I finished for her. She nodded, shoulders trembling, the shawl slipping slightly from one shoulder. The bare skin of her collarbone glowed faintly in the afternoon light, and despite the ache twisting inside me, I couldn't stop staring. She caught the look. A flicker of something, fear, longing, both, crossed her face. She pulled the shawl tighter, as though it could shield her from my gaze. "You see?" she whispered. "This is why it can't happen." I stepped forward before I could think better of it. Close enough that the air between us grew warmer, close enough that her breath trembled against my chest. "And yet it already has. Even if we haven't said it out loud." Her hand rose instinctively, pressing lightly against me, not to push me away but to steady herself. The touch burned through the fabric of my shirt. My heart pounded beneath her palm, so loud I knew she felt it. "I don't want to ruin you," she said, her voice breaking. "You won't," I whispered. "You can't." She shook her head, tears glinting in her eyes. But her hand stayed on me. Her other hand brushed against mine, a hesitant, trembling contact that felt more intimate than any kiss. The silence swelled, pressing against our ribs. I leaned my forehead against hers, unable to resist. She closed her eyes, breathing unevenly, and for a heartbeat I thought she would let go of all her fear. Then, with a sudden sharpness, she pulled back. Her eyes locked on mine, fierce now, not fragile. "You don't understand. Once we cross this line, we can't go back. Not ever." I exhaled, the truth cutting through me. "Then maybe I don't want to go back." The words hung there, electric, final. Her lips parted, but she said nothing. Instead, she turned sharply and walked toward the terrace door. Halfway there, she stopped, her back to me, shoulders trembling. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "Tonight," she said. "Meet me here. No more hiding." And then she stepped outside, leaving me breathless, every nerve in my body alive with the inevitability of what was coming. The terrace was silver with moonlight when I stepped out. She was already there, arms folded around herself, as though the night alone wasn't enough to steady her. The breeze lifted strands of her hair, and for a long moment I simply watched, the shape of her, the stillness, the ache of everything unspoken. "You came," she said without turning. "Of course." Her shoulders rose and fell with a shaky breath. "Then this is it." I moved closer. Each step tightened the knot in my chest. She finally turned to face me, and I saw it, the fear, the hunger, the unbearable tension of someone caught between wanting and refusing. "We don't have to say anything," I whispered. Her eyes glistened. "But if we don't, it'll destroy us anyway." I stopped just inches from her, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her body. My hand lifted, hesitant, before brushing back the strands of hair that the wind had carried across her face. My knuckles grazed her cheek, and her eyes fluttered closed at the touch. When she opened them again, there was no mask left. Only her. "You're too young," she whispered, though her voice broke on the words. "And you're too afraid," I said softly. She drew in a sharp breath, and in it I heard years of silence, loneliness, the kind of longing she had hidden from everyone. Her hand rose slowly, uncertain, before resting against my chest. The tremor in her fingers betrayed her. "Do you know what they'll say about me?" I leaned closer, my forehead brushing against hers. "I don't care what they say." Our words came like confessions now, each one a wound and a bomb. The night pressed in, carrying the sound of our breathing, the pounding of blood in our veins. She let her head fall against me, her temple resting against my jaw. The contact was small, simple, but it undid me completely. My arms went around her, tentative at first, then firmer when she didn't resist. She sank into me, her body trembling, and for a moment it felt like the whole world had narrowed to this fragile closeness. "We can't go back," she murmured, her lips brushing so close to my skin that it sent shivers down my spine. "Then don't," I whispered back. Her hands slid upward, clutching at my shoulders as though bracing herself. I tilted her face up, our eyes locking, and for a heartbeat we hovered there, the kiss inevitable, the choice hanging heavy between us. Her lips parted. My breath mingled with hers. The universe seemed to hold itself still. And then, finally, she closed the distance. It wasn't reckless, not hungry at first. It was slow, trembling, a kiss that tasted of surrender and fear and every silent night we had endured. But as her fingers tightened at the back of my neck and I pulled her closer, it deepened, raw and unrestrained. When we broke apart, her forehead rested against mine, both of us breathless, shaking. She laughed then, not with amusement, but with disbelief, with the relief of something too long denied. "So this is who we are now," she said softly. "No," I answered. "This is who we've always been. We just stopped pretending." Her eyes softened, her hand brushing my face with aching tenderness. In that look I saw everything, her fear, her desire, her acceptance. And I knew we had crossed the line together, with full clarity, no more disguises. The night stretched endlessly around us, but inside, something had finally come to rest. The night after our kiss, I expected distance again. Silence. Regret. But instead, when morning came, I found her in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, hair loose around her shoulders. She was stirring tea, humming under her breath, as though nothing had shattered between us. When she saw me, she didn't flinch. Didn't turn away. Her lips curved, small and hesitant, but undeniably real. "Good morning," she said, sliding a cup toward me. I stood there for a moment, just watching her. My chest ached with the memory of the night before, the way her mouth had trembled against mine, the way her fear had finally broken into need. I took the cup, our fingers brushing, and the warmth of her skin stayed with me longer than the heat of the tea. We sat across from each other, the silence not heavy now but tender, filled with something unspoken yet understood. Finally, she broke it. I didn't sleep, she admitted, eyes lowering to her cup. Me either. She smiled faintly. I kept thinking about everything. What it means. What it will mean. I leaned forward. And? Her eyes lifted to mine, clear now, calmer than I expected. And I realized I'm tired of being afraid. I've lived too much of my life worrying about what people think. About the lines I'm supposed to stay inside. But last night, she hesitated, her voice catching. Last night, I felt alive again. The words struck deep. I reached across the table, covering her hand with mine. She didn't pull away. Instead, her fingers curled around mine, holding tight. We sat like that for a long time, the hum of the morning filling the spaces between us. Every so often her thumb brushed against my hand, absent and natural, like we had done this all our lives. Later, we drifted back to the terrace. The sun was lower now, spilling gold across the plants she had so carefully tended. She leaned against the railing, and I joined her close enough that our arms touched. Neither of us moved away. You still think it's wrong? I asked quietly. She was silent for a long time, watching the light catch on the leaves. Then she shook her head. No. I think it's ours. And that's enough. Her words wrapped around me like the warmth of her shawl. I slid my hand into hers, fingers intertwining easily, as though they had always belonged that way. She turned to me then, her eyes soft, her mouth curved with something between relief and longing. I kissed her forehead, slow and lingering. She closed her eyes, leaning into it, and for the first time, the tension between us softened into something steady, something real. When she opened her eyes, there was no fear in them. Only recognition. We stood there, hand in hand, the world beyond the terrace feeling distant and unimportant. Whatever questions remained, the whispers, the doubts, the complications, could wait. For now, we had chosen each other. That choice was enough. The breeze carried the faint scent of jasmine, the plants rustling softly around us. She leaned against me, her head resting lightly against my shoulder. And in that quiet, I knew this wasn't the end of something forbidden, but the beginning of something finally honest,